Hello and welcome to the last of this series. Crackpot schemes are good ideas badly executed by Churchill in World War II. And it's this one. Italy as the soft underbelly. Now, this becomes a crackpot scheme if you're thinking about it from the perspective of the war in Europe. Because look at this map. Look at how quickly they get up from the toe of Italy up to the north of Italy. They don't. These maps, they're not getting up there quickly. In fact, they're not even out of Italy by the end of World War II. They are really not. But that only depends if you're thinking about Italy as part of the war in Europe. And of course, it's about the war in Europe. You know, I'm sure people are saying to me, "It's about the war in Europe. It's fought in Europe." The war in Italy, in my opinion, is nothing to do with Italy and everything to do with Egypt, or rather the Suez Canal. For the British to rapidly start redeploying forces to the Pacific, for the Royal Navy and resupply of units in the Far East, in India, the British Pacific Fleet to be formed, all these things, you need to be able to make a transit through the Mediterranean, and you need to be able to use the Suez Canal, because otherwise you are going a very, very long way, and it's very expensive and very difficult. You also need to be able to bring resources back the other way to fire up your factories and keep them going. So Britain can produce its own portion of goods for Lend-Lease. So this is where some people will probably be upset, but a lot of people won't be if they've read some of the recent publications and literature and have done the same maths I've done. The war in Italy is nothing to do with the war in Europe. The war in Italy is about the war in the Far East. It's about Britain getting back there. It's about pushing the Germans and the fascisti Italians out of their air bases, out of the Mediterranean, and out of the ability to interfere with convoys going backwards and forwards. Taking the Italian fleet out of World War II is critical. Remember, and I have said this before in many videos, and I will say this again, the Italian fleet is the biggest annoyance for the British in the entirety of World War II. They are a far more balanced, far more capable fleet than the Germans ever managed to achieve to be. If the Germans had ever achieved some of the task forces which the Regia Marina had managed to put to sea, they would have been ecstatic. The Italian fleet sits astride Britain's critical global supply line, which is the Suez Canal, Mediterranean, Indian Ocean pipeline. That is the critical route. That is the critical trade flow. If you can knock the Italians out of World War II and knock the Italian fleet out of World War II, Britain can do so much more, and they suddenly become far more powerful and far more flexible, and they're no longer so dependent upon the Americans in the Far East. I am sure the Americans understood this. I am sure Churchill understood this. I am sure Churchill understood there were significant portions of American high command who didn't want the British back in the Far East in strength because they wanted the Pacific to be an American victory. They needed it to be an American rather than Allied victory, especially after Pearl Harbor, but also because the Pacific was their area and they wanted the Europeans out. which you can understand. It's their backyard and they've been attacked in it and they want to stamp their control. There are legitimate and understandable reasons for all this. It's not just Americans being parochial. It's very sensible. But just as important for the British is getting back there, is being there. And that means they need to have their ability to be there. They need to have their ability to resupply their forces there. And they can't as long as the Italians are in the war. So, Churchill says the soft underbelly of Europe. Churchill is not as stupid as that same phrase would make him seem to believe. He does think it's easier to knock the Italians out of the war than it is to knock the Germans. But the reason he wants to knock the Italians out of the war isn't to get to Germany. He doesn't believe you're going to fight through the Italians and get up the Alps. Remember, this is a man who had been senior during World War I, who'd been around in World War I, who understood that fighting through the Alps had been an absolute nightmare for the Italians, the British troops and the French troops deployed there, and frankly no one wanted to go through that again. He's not an idiot. He's not thinking about Italy as invading Italy as a way to get in to Germany. He's thinking about invading Italy as a way to knock the European theatre out of the worldwide conflict. Because you start to contain Germany and German power in Northern Europe and slowly condense it down. You break up the theatres. And this is what some German strategists probably understood, but again, people don't seem to have fully put together, because the Mediterranean theatre is the linking theatre. If you knock Italy out of it, the Mediterranean theatre goes from being a major warfighting zone to being a movement zone. A zone that might be occasionally contested movements, but you can move your forces through it. And therefore, your lines of communication between you and the Far East are suddenly dramatically shortened, and you can start moving forces backwards and forwards as you need to be. Imagine World War II without Italy in it. Imagine if Italy doesn't get involved in World War II, if they declare themselves neutral, and Britain only has to keep a nucleus fleet in the Mediterranean to keep an eye just in case the Italians suddenly change their mind. Imagine the different forces which would have been in the Indian Ocean and different forces which would have been in the Atlantic to face off against the Germans. Imagine the different complexity of forces that would have been available. Force H would have been in a completely different position if it had just been about dealing with the Germans and not the possibility of the Italians breaking out of the Western Mediterranean trying to get into the Atlantic. Doubtful they'd ever do that, but it's there, so they have to be around Gibraltar. Imagine it without you having to maintain the force that Cunningham maintains in the Eastern Mediterranean, other Mediterranean fleet. Without having to fight in North Africa. All those things out if you don't have Italy in the war. The Italian campaign is not about the war in Europe. The Italian campaign is about the World War. It is about the British getting back into the war in the Far East. There is no surprise when you start looking at the correlation of forces Britain is able to put in the Far East versus what has happened on the Italian mainland. The further the Italian front line gets pushed north, the more secure the British are in the Mediterranean, the more forces can be shunted to the Far East. The Mediterranean's a major theatre of war. Why is the Mediterranean important to the British? Because it links their empire together. Italy sits astride that. Italy is not about getting to Germany. Italy is about getting to Japan. Which is really terrible when you think about the number of Americans and Brits who die there. because you start to think, well, why is it important Britain gets to the Far East? Why is it important Britain gets to the Far East, and why are they sacrificing lives for this, British and American lives? Because you need those ships in the Far East, because you need those troops, because ultimately a lot of Americans understood you did need the British ships, because even the Americans are not producing enough ships for an invasion of Japan. You need a lot more ships. You need a lot more experienced crews, because an invasion of Japan would make D-Day look like a stroll in the park. We know that. The sheer fear and terror of what an invasion of Japan would be like is what justified the use of the most terrible and destructive weapons that have ever been deployed by humankind. The creation and use of the nuclear weapons was done entirely because of fear of what an invasion of Japan would be like because of the operations. And it's the same with this. Yes, ground forces would be committed fighting in Europe and fighting in Germany until the end, and then would move across to the Far East. They understood that. But before you can move ground forces, you need to move a huge amount of supplies there for them, a huge amount of infrastructure. You need to have all sorts of supplies in place before those people even start to show up. Fuel and also ships need to be out there. You need to be pushing the Japanese back. You need to be supporting the British Pacific Fleet, the Indian Ocean forces, the Eastern Fleet, in their operations, in pushing for Singapore and pushing for various other territories. Because why are you going to? Do you want to take Singapore back? Why is taking Singapore justifiable before invasion of Japan? Again, because it shortens the route of your supplies to get to the Far East from Britain, from India, and because days of supply routes are going to matter. It comes down to logistics. It comes down to the very peculiar mathematics of a global war, where you launch a humongous campaign across a country, where you do all you do, where you are going to sacrifice somewhere in the region of 330,000 people lives to fight a campaign to try and make another campaign viable, which is critical for the end of the war. Plus, it has other advantages to add to it. It's going to reduce the amount of forces the Germans have to resist in Normandy. It's going to stretch their logistics that much further, because they're fighting on the Eastern Front against the Soviets. They're going to now have to send troops down and fight in Italy. They're going to be having to fight down there. They're then going to then Normandy. So they basically are fighting on three fronts. And yes, they have you can say they have internal logistics for that, but that's also three fronts draining their fuel supplies. 3 fronts worth of logistics to get the logistics to those fronts. All that starts to have a factor, and all that has to start as a bearing, because that's what war is about. That's what a world war is about, really, and logistics and supplies. And that's why Italy is launched. So yes, was Churchill right when he said Italy is the soft underbelly? No. Did Churchill believe Italy was the soft underbelly? No. Did Churchill have a particular obsession with Mussolini? Quite probably. He really didn't like the man. He saw him as the gateway that let in Hitler and Franco, and frankly, therefore he accused him of a lot. Justifiable in some regards. But was that the reason Churchill wanted to invade Italy? No. He was invading Italy because that would secure the Mediterranean. And securing the Mediterranean would secure the fastest east-west supply lines possible, which would make everything else viable. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that. That's the last of this series. The next one's coming up. As you can see, are long patrols. 9th to the 15th of August are Great Ideas and Bad Execution, or just Bad Luck, the non-Churchill editions. There's going to be 3 of those, possibly more, and I'm going to record those while I'm away teaching and then post them up. I'm doing recordings because I don't think I have hardwire. I think I just have Wi-Fi where I am, and therefore it's far more reliable for me to post it that way as recorded videos than to try and do a live over Wi-Fi. I might try live over Wi-Fi from one of the places I'm at, but over the next couple of weeks, but you know. So when does that mean I have the next live? Next live is listed as 15th of August. Brew ships, a special. Questions. What ifs till the brew runs out? Number 3. So that's the next scheduled one. Is 15th of August. We have the vote currently live for patrons 30 and 31. And then you have the list of the other things coming up. Now, you'll notice that I have live scheduled for the 10th of September. That will hopefully take place, but again, I will be operating potentially from somewhere by Wi-Fi, so that might be turned into a recorded video. And it's the same with the Karl Donitz one. Potentially, they will become recordings, but hopefully live. Currently, Brew Ships 58 is on the 19th of September. That might move earlier. That might move to the 12th. I'm going to decide. It depends on various things going around. But as you can see, it stretches the lives right into October. And we have HMS Dreadnought Day coming up on the 2nd of October, which is favourite dreadnoughts, battleships, and battle cruisers to be discussed. And please send in your suggestions of what your favourites are. You know, I'm quite happy to take suggestions and listen to them, and might well include them. And the Battle of Kentish Knock on the 8th of October, which I've been promising for a while. I think I first scheduled that last year and didn't manage to get round to it, so I scheduled it, moved it to this year to do it on the actual date, and said I will do it, and I'm going to do the Battle of Kentish Knock from 1652, mainly because it's one of the coolest names of a battle I have ever heard of, and I have been wanting to talk about it for a while. Anyway, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed. If you do like the videos, please maybe consider subscribing. If you fancy some cool emojis for when you're in the chat, and making sure you have, I do respond to your comments, because there are starting to get a lot more comments, and I do respond to them where possible and where there are questions. When there aren't questions, I just sort of send back a smile or something and just go, I can't respond to something which isn't a question. I'm sorry. I can't imagine a question where there isn't one. Then please consider joining the channel. That's very nice, and that's definitely, I set that up originally for people who don't want to become patrons because they don't like the way Patreon sometimes acts. I find Patreon pretty useful. The grade of funding and the grades of income viable for people, and the various options in terms of merchandise, which I've got going through Patreon. I am planning on doing other proper merchandise at some point. I am working with Drac on that, and there could be some t-shirts some point soon, and various other things maybe after that. So I hope you're all enjoying this, and thank you. Your support, your time, your questions, your ideas. In this case, the ideas from the lovely old Richard make this all possible. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion of Italy and why it happened. It's one of the most interesting parts especially I'd say Italy of World War II, in that the Italian campaign gets so many people going, I don't know why it's done, da 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 da. And you sit there and go, well, look at a worldwide map. That tells you. And look at the strategic discussions. That tells you. Yes, it's easy to get into the glib responses. And yes, it's a terrible campaign. It is one of the hardest fought campaigns you've got. You have 150,000 Italian civilians died. You have all sorts of people get caught up in it. It is an absolutely bitter fight in many places. And there is so much culture and heritage destroyed by it. But it is essential for the next phase of the war. And that's what it's being fought for. Not for Europe, but for the Far East. Thank you very much. Hope you have a nice day. And here we go. Take care.